Seattle has won 6 of their last 7, while the Falcons have lost 6 of their last 7. Will the Seahawks keep it rolling this weekend in Atlanta, or will the Falcons cause them to stumble?
You are Locked On NFL Crossover, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Locked On Falcons and Locked On Seahawks. I am, of course, the host of Locked On Falcons, Aaron Freeman, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast, and I'm joined by Corbin Smith, the host of Locked On Seahawks, your daily Seattle Seahawks podcast. Both of these great shows are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, and, of course, both are part of the #1 sports podcast network in the galaxy, and we thank each and every one of you that is an everydayer of Locked On Falcons and Locked On Seahawks. You are the reason why we are #1 in the galaxy, and all you have to do to become an everydayer and make either one of these shows your first listen each and every day is subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts to get the latest episode as soon as it is available. So today is, of course, a crossover Thursday, which is presented by Prize Picks. Download the Prize Picks app today and use code LOCKEDONNFL, and you'll get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. So since it is a crossover Thursday, we will be previewing this week 14 matchup between the Seattle Seahawks and the Atlanta Falcons. We'll talk about the biggest stories ongoing for both of these two teams in two very different positions, one at the top of the NFC, one near the bottom of the NFC. We'll talk about some of the key matchups that we'll be having our eyes on this Sunday, as well as some of the keys to victory. So Corbin, as the humble host here, with the Atlanta Falcons hosting the Seattle Seahawks, making their triumphant return to Atlanta, where they beat the Falcons a year ago with Geno Smith. Can they do it again with Sam Darnold? What is, to you, the big story for the Seattle Seahawks entering this matchup?
Well, I think the biggest storyline for Seattle is the chance for this team to be healthier. And that's the crazy thing, is the Seahawks are 9-3, and they've had some really good players that have been on the sideline for a number of weeks, including Pro Bowl safety Julian Love. And they've been able to weather that storm because Tyakata has played really good football in his place. But there's a chance Julian Love is going to be available this week. He returned to practice. They have not activated him to the 53-man roster yet, but there's a chance that Julian Love could play this weekend. And defensive tackle Jarran Reed, Atlanta's offensive line's probably not too excited hearing about this possibility that Jarran Reed could be back to go with Leonard Williams and Byron Murphy II. Seattle's interior D-line has continued to hum in recent weeks. You can ask the Minnesota Vikings offensive line this past weekend. It's been a real struggle for any team to try to deal with those two guys. And even players like Brandon Peely have emerged with Jarran Reed being out for the last month and played really good football. So you just plug Jarran Reed back in with that group potentially on Sunday. This has a chance to be a situation where the rich get richer, because this defense is coming off a shutout, albeit against an undrafted rookie quarterback, but it was still an utterly dominant performance. And the offense has actually been kind of scuffling in 2 of the past 3 games, but they've still been able to win and almost won the game against the Rams, even with Sam Darnold throwing 4 picks. Like, if they can just get Sam Darnold back to playing, halfway where he was at for most of this season with the way the defense is playing right now, then this team can absolutely get that top seed in the NFC. But they got a lot of competition, even to just win their own division with 3 teams at 9-4 or better. This has been an absolute gauntlet in the NFC West. And I know for the Falcons that, Aaron, this has been a team that I'm going to be honest, early in the year or before the season started, I had the Falcons as my sleeper to win the NFC South. And things started off okay, but we know about the quarterback injury and Kirk Cousins having to come back in and some of the other major issues that they've had, particularly on the offensive side of the ball. What can the Falcons do to just try to get this thing turned around? I mean, right now they're in a really tough spot in that NFC South division, especially with the Panthers playing good football and Tampa Bay still with plenty of comfortable room at the top of the division. Like, well, what can they try to do this week to just try to get the ball rolling in the right direction?
Well, it would help a lot if they could get Drake London back this week. It doesn't sound like he's going to be back. And And to me, it's kind of interesting because that's kind of the big story, at least for this specific game, but not because it potentially impacts this game. It's kind of potentially going to impact next week's game with the Falcons, going on the road, I believe, against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers on Thursday night. And in order with that quick turnaround, you're going to need to see some progress on Drake London working back from the PCL sprain that has sidelined him the last couple of weeks. And that would be the biggest thing that would help the Falcons turn things around this week. But it doesn't seem like that's likely to happen. And as you mentioned it, Corbin, like when we talk, the 1,000-foot view of this team rather than just focusing on this specific game, these last 5 games of the season, while Seattle is sitting here fighting, for their playoff seeding, but feeling in a pretty good spot as they sit, near the top of the NFC with their 9-3 record, the Falcons are near the bottom. And really, these last 5 games are just kind of, you want to see, this team perform well because they're kind of fighting for their jobs at this point in time, whether or not they're going to be retained after the season. And a lot of that's probably going to hinge whether it should or should not, how they perform against teams like Seattle, teams like Tampa Bay, teams like the LA Rams that they have in this final stretch, all these sort of playoff teams. We'll see if Tampa Bay can hold their grip on that NFC South crown with Carolina nipping on their heels. But like, that's really what's kind of at stake for this team. And so we've seen this Falcon team play well against some quality opponents. They beat the Buffalo Bills. They went toe-to-toe with the Colts and Patriots earlier this season. And so it wouldn't shock me at all if the Falcons step it up a level to the quality of the Seahawks competition. But that's been kind of the issue with the Falcons, where they'll look good against a good team, but they'll also look really bad against a bad team, as you've seen earlier, last week losing to the Jets, getting completely blown out by Miami earlier this season. And so those are going to be the challenges for the Falcons. Can they kind of rise up, pun intended, to match this Seattle team this weekend? That's going to be kind of the big story for them.
And look, they're aiming to continue Mike Macdonald's mastery playing away from Lumen Field. He is right on the cusp of tying George Seifert for the most road wins by an NFL coach in his first 2 seasons. Like, they have been absolute road warriors. And this is already a stadium, and albeit last year with different rosters, that Seattle, one of their best, most complete games was in Atlanta last year. So they're going to be looking to keep that going. And to this point, I think maybe one of the most impressive things for Macdonald as a young coach, like, his team generally has not they've had a couple examples last year where they slipped up. They lost to the New York Giants at home, for example. That was a dreadful loss that ended up costing them the postseason. But they've generally avoided slip-ups against bad teams. Even this last week, Minnesota, with the injuries that they've been dealing with and having Max Brosmer under center, that would have been a game the last couple of years of Pete Carroll's tenure. Seattle probably would have come out and let Max Brosmer throw for 350 yards. Like, that's the way that they played the last couple of years with Pete Carroll. They played down to their competition, very similar to what Atlanta has had issues with at times this year. This has been a different story for the Seahawks team. Like New Orleans, when they came to town, they were up 21-0 before you blinked an eye. And Arizona a few weeks back, the Washington game, they got up big. They were up 35-0 in that game. Like, they have been really good at just putting underwhelming or inferior football teams away early. They're going to be hoping to keep that trend continuing on Sunday, because this is a team, and I'm sure you would back this up, if Atlanta could get some momentum early, especially with a veteran quarterback like Kirk Cousins under center, if they could have momentum early and keep this game close and get their confidence going. They have played teams like the Colts really hard earlier this year. So Seattle can't come in and have that happen. They can't afford to have a slip up early and let Atlanta start to think they can hang around and win this game. If they do, then this could end up being a real close one.
Yeah, as you mentioned, this Seahawks team has been very good on the road. You oftentimes are like, oh, well, we'll get a West Coast team a little sleepy in the Eastern time zone, heading into a Sunday game, but that has not been the story for the Seahawks team under Mike Macdonald. It must be nice, Corbin, to cover a team that, actually plays up to their ability on a weekly basis. And you talk about that fast start. That's going to be potentially a key to victory for this Atlanta Falcon team. But before we get into sort of the things that the Falcons or Seahawks can do to win this game. We'll talk about some of the key matchups that will also help either one of these teams win this game, and we'll break that down as we continue today's Crossover Thursday presented by Prize Picks. Today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. With the holiday season being one of the best times of year for sports, we got college football, NFL football, college and NBA basketball. It's playoff pushes, bowl games. It's all happening at once. And since we're making decisions every single day this time of year, Prize Picks is one of the most fun places where that right call can get you paid. It's the easiest way to get in on daily fantasy. Just pick more or less on at least 2 player stat projections, lock in your lineup, and you're in the game. And it's just you versus the stat projection. So you don't have to worry about if other people are in on your lineup. It's that simple. It's that fast. And it's also available in 45 states, including California, Texas, Florida, and Georgia. And their new stacks feature is making it even easier, where you can choose the same player up to 3 times in one lineup, where you can go more on a quarterback's passing yards, touchdowns, and rushing yards. So download the Prize Picks app today and use code LOCKEDONNFL, and you'll get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONNFL for $50 in lineups after your first $5 play. Prize Picks, it's good to be right. So we want to once again thank you guys for making Locked On Falcons and Locked On Seahawks your first listen each and every day. And you are the reason that Locked On Podcast Network is now the #1 sports podcast network in the galaxy. So continuing today's Crossover Thursday presented by Prize Picks, Corbin, let's get into some of these key matchups. You mentioned, the Falcons do have some firepower with Kirk Cousins at the helm at the quarterback position. Obviously, for the Seahawks fans that missed it, Michael Penix went down with a season-ending ACL injury a few weeks ago, and Kirk Cousins has been at the helm, and he's kind of stabilized things. But the issues with the Falcons has been, despite having all the talent that they have in their offensive skill rooms, obviously, as we mentioned earlier, Drake London not necessarily probably going to be available this Sunday coming off that PCL sprain. But they still have Bijan Robinson. They still have Kyle Pitts. And I expect both of those guys to be heavily featured in this matchup. You're going to need Bijan to have another big game. He's had plenty this season. Unfortunately, too many of them have been, in losses like last week against the Jets. And then you look at Kyle Pitts, who's coming off one of his better games against the New York Jets. I know Seattle has struggled covering tight ends. They've believe they're ranked 30th in the NFL in terms of yards allowed to the tight end position. And if they can get those 2 guys going, that's going to be a big hope and big boost for this Falcons offense to maybe, find ways to attack a very good, arguably, based off of what metrics you're looking at, the best defense in the NFL with the Seattle Seahawks. But I think really the key for the Falcons is, can they get a third guy going? And normally that would be no problem if Drake London was in the lineup, but he's not. And so they really kind of need Darnell Mooney to kind of have a good game. He's basically had one good game this season. It's been a disaster season for Darnell Mooney after a great 2024, dealing with a collarbone injury that kept him out of training camp. He just hasn't looked healthy. He hasn't looked locked in. He's been inconsistent. The drops have been there. He hasn't been getting open, all those things. And so this would be a great week for Darnell Mooney to sort of come alive. And if he can join Bijan Robinson and Kyle Pitts, and be, 3 weapons that Kirk Cousins can feature in this offense, that I think will give the Falcons their best chance of being able to put some points up against a very good Seattle Seahawks defense.
Yeah, I think from Seattle's defensive perspective, Aaron, the running back room for Atlanta, that to me is the biggest concern coming into this game. The Seahawks run defense has been fantastic. They haven't given up a 100-yard rusher this entire season. They have really locked down on opposing run games. And a big part of that has been their linebackers. Ernest Jones right now, if I had the ability to vote for the all-pro teams, Ernest Jones would be a first-team selection. He's got 5 interceptions. He has been absolutely fantastic. And the guy next to him, Drake Thomas, has been pretty much as good this year. He's got 10 tackles for loss, 3.5 sacks. 6 pass breakups. He's been doing everything at the other linebacker spot. But this might be the biggest challenge they've had this entire season, dealing with Bijan Robinson and Tyler Algier. Those 2 guys both offer very different skill sets. They can both get involved in the passing game. So I look at that as the biggest matchup for the Seahawks in this game defensively. They have to find a way. You can't let Bijan Robinson and Tyler Algier take this game over. You have to be able to keep that run game in check. You got to swarm to the football and make sure you limit yards after contact. Make sure you're not giving up a lot of yards after the catch if they're getting passes out of the backfield. So that's going to fall a lot on the linebackers for Seattle. You look at the other side of the equation for the Seahawks offensively going into this game. It's so weird saying this because this covering the Falcons, like how many years it had been where they were one of the worst pass rushes in the NFL, like year in, year out. I believe when we had this same conversation about this time last year that it was pretty similar in the sense that, well, can Atlanta muster a pass rush? But that has been a 180 for them this year. If there has been a positive, it's been the fact they've got 41 sacks. The Seahawks are the only team. This is the only team ahead of the Seahawks, actually, in the NFC for sacks, is the Atlanta Falcons. And I do worry a little bit about, especially coming after the game in Minnesota, where the Vikings got so much pressure on Sam Darnold in the first half. And this offensive line's been really good pretty much the entire rest of the season. But Minnesota's blitzing, their sim packages. The tackles had some issues. Charles Cross and Abraham Lucas gave up some quick pressures. I look at Atlanta, the fact that Leonard Floyd has been a Seahawk killer no matter what uniform he's worn over the course of his career. Some of the young guys they've got that are rushing off the edge as well, like Pierce and Walker. That to me is the matchup from Seattle's perspective. They have to be able to try to limit the effectiveness of those guys off the edge. The tackles have to bring their A game this game. Give Sam Darnold some time to throw, because I think if he does have time to throw in this game and he's not under such quick duress and having passes knocked down to the line left and right, we know what Sam Darnold's done the rest of this season. And I feel like there are matchups on the outside the Seahawks can absolutely capitalize on, but they got to give Sam Darnold the time to be able to utilize his receivers on the outside.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. JSN could definitely have a big game this week. And normally I would be like, oh, well, we'll put AJ Terrell on him and match him up in man coverage. But, JSN has basically been playing at for Falcon fans, at least a Julio Jones level of performance where, if you're going to try to man him up, it has been a problem for pretty much every defense this season. And so if you trust in AJ Terrell to do that, good luck to that. But as we learned for many years when Julio Jones was that wide receiver, that usually is a poor strategy on the part of the defense. And so I agree with you. It really starts up front for the Falcons. They have to get pressure regardless of how they try to handle the Seahawks passing game in the secondary. If they can win up front and really get after the quarterback, like we've seen a couple of times in recent, as you mentioned, that Vikings game, the Rams game, it goes back a couple of those interceptions from Sam Darnold were when the Rams were able to get effective pressure in his face and force him to make some mistakes. And I think that will be something that the Falcons have the potential to do. They'll just have to go out there and deliver it. We have seen this pass rush come alive this season. It's primarily been fueled by the blitz. The last few games, they've been trying to get their four-man pass rush going. And regardless of whether they're going to rely on 4 or bring 5 on a consistent basis, then as you mentioned, I think a healthy mix of both will be the best formula and best strategy for this team. If they can't get effective pressure, they kind of have to kind of dominate this game if they expect to kind of slow down the Seahawks offense.
Yeah, and then I also look at this from a perspective, if Seattle wants to help out Sam Darnold, I don't think the Falcons and Vikings are carbon copies. Obviously, they do things differently in terms of how they blitz and how they generate their pressures. But I do look at this being a game in similar sense. Last week, Seattle was able to get 100-plus rushing yards for the 4th straight game. That's the longest streak they've had. They've got their run game going a little bit better the last few weeks. And I look at the linebackers for Atlanta, scouted Caden Ellis when he was coming out of Idaho. And then at the other linebacker spot, Diablo, like this is a game if Seattle can play some bully ball, which they've been able to do the last few weeks. They did it with Minnesota's front 7. That to me is the biggest key to keeping Sam Darnold protected, is getting that run game going and then having the play action game, which they kind of got away from last week against Minnesota. They have been absolutely lethal on play action all year long. I'm just looking at the matchups here in terms of that front 7, and I think Seattle has the ability to be able to maybe physically bully and wear down Atlanta's front seven and then get to those linebackers, and that can cause some real problems where you could have some home runs. Ken Walker's running different the last few games. He looks like a different dog. K9 has a different bark. Zach Charbonnet is racking up missed tackles left and right. He's playing well. It seems like they are on the cusp of that run game really breaking out. And I do think that this is an opponent that potentially they could take another step forward against. And I think that would have a ripple effect on getting their passing game back to where it was before a couple weeks ago.
Absolutely. The Falcons' run defense has been a struggle bus for most of the season. They've been a little bit better over the last 2-3 games. And so we'll see which version of the Falcons' run defense shows up. Can they slow down this Seahawks run game, or will this be sort of that game where you're talking about Seattle can get things going? And we'll talk more about other things that each of these teams are going to try to get going as we break down sort of what keys to victory will allow either one of these teams to walk away with a win as we wrap up today's Crossover Thursday. So continue with today's Crossover Thursday, talking keys to victory. For me, a big one is going to be the turnover margin. Looking up the numbers, the Seahawks record under Mike Macdonald, when they have a negative turnover margin, meaning that they give the ball away more than they take the ball away, is 3-8. Well, the Falcons record under Raheem Morris, when they have a positive turnover margin, is 9-2. And if you do the reverse on that, right, Seattle is 7-0 when they have a positive turnover margin, and the Falcons are 1-11 when they have a negative one under Raheem Morris. So this, to me, turnovers are going to be a key. If they can heat up Sam Darnold, if they can create some turnovers, that to me is going to be one of the biggest keys to victory for either team going into Sunday.
Yeah, the turnovers, it's been interesting because the Seahawks have been one of the worst in the NFL at giving the football up to other teams, and yet they've continued to play winning football for the most part. They had 4 turnovers against the Houston Texans in a game earlier this year, and they still put up 27 points on that vaunted defense. So they've just been, for the most part, able to overcome those issues. Even the Rams game, they had a chance to win in the closing seconds with a field goal, even with Sam Darnold's 4 interceptions. They have been able to stay in games. The defense has certainly helped by keeping the score within manageable distance in those situations. But I look from a Seahawks perspective this week. You know, it's always easy to point to the turnovers, and that, I think, week in, week out is something teams are trying. You want to win that because of the statistics not being in your favor if you lose the turnover margin. But I look at Atlanta the way they do things. Again, they are not carbon copies of Minnesota. They don't run the same type of blitzes. They're not going to be running Brian Flores defense necessarily, but they're similar in the sense that they are going to be aggressive, sending extra rushers. Raheem Morris is going to bring extra guys. Seattle has to find a way to avoid 3rd and longs. Last week, I think that was the biggest issue they had in the first half. Second half, they avoided any sacks. And part of it was they ran the ball a lot more effectively, and they were getting themselves in better 3rd down distances that were more manageable. They left way too many plays, though, in the first half last week where it was 3rd and 7, 3rd and 8, 3rd and 10, and that allowed Brian Flores to reach into his bag. And the same thing would happen with Raheem Morris. If the Seahawks cannot win on 1st and 2nd down consistently and keep putting themselves in rough 3rd down spots, that's going to make life a lot harder for Sam Darnold just because of opening up the playbook for the defense and condensing it for Clint Kubiak. So they've got to have more consistent 3rd and manageable situations, or just avoid 3rd downs. That's something they've been really good at most of this year. Win on 1st and 2nd down against this Falcons defense. And that's one way you can take away the pass rush for Atlanta as well, is just having those 3rd and manageables where you have the entire playbook at your disposal. I think that's the biggest key for the Seahawks, and the run game is going to be a part of it, of course, but it's more success and efficiency on 1st and 2nd downs. I think that is crucial this game for Seattle's offense.
Well, I think you'll have an opportunity to see that. The Falcons have been very up and down when they've come to defending the play action. And as you mentioned, the play action passing game has been a big part of that Seahawks success this season. So we'll see if they can get that going again against this Falcons team. Another key for me, as you mentioned earlier, Corbin, is a fast start. The Falcons really need to put Seattle in a position where they're forced to abandon their run game, where they're potentially forced to abandon their play action passing game because they're down, 2 scores or whatever, and trying to sell the run is maybe not necessarily a winning strategy. And so if they can get off to a fast start, as they did 2 weeks ago when they beat the Saints, the one win that they've had in their last 7 games, and go up early, that I think will give the Falcons their best chance. And then for me, the last key to victory is the Falcons can't afford any mistakes on special teams. Special teams really ruined them against the New York Jets. You go to websites like FTN Fantasy with their DVOA rankings. Seattle has the 2nd ranked special teams unit, and the Falcons have the 30th ranked special teams unit. So basically you need Seattle to have an uncharacteristically bad day on special teams, and the Falcons to have an uncharacteristically good day on special teams in order to enhance the Falcons' chances of winning.
Yeah, you pointed out special teams. I was going to say take advantage of your special teams advantages, because Seattle has been number 1 in special teams DVOA for most of this year, and they have slipped to number 2, but they're still playing at a very high level, even with some of the injuries they've had. Now, you get Julian Love, Jaron Reed back this week, and maybe Eric Saubert as well. Eric Saubert's an outstanding special teams player, and that's going to slide guys like Ty Akata back into special teams. And Ty Akata has been an excellent special teamer when they've used him in that capacity. So the rich could get richer as kind of that domino effect if they get some of their injured starters back this week. We'll see who ends up suiting up on that front. But Seattle's got to flex their muscles on special teams in this game. And I think defensively, I mentioned it earlier, this is not a disrespect to Kirk Cousins. I think a lot of Kirk Cousins. I've always respected him as a professional, and he's had some games he's absolutely carved up the Seahawks in the past. But at this stage, especially if he's not going to have Drake London, like, I'm putting the ball in Kirk Cousins' court, and I'm saying, okay, we're taking away your run game, or we're going to limit your run game. We're going to try to do the best we can to bottle up Bijan Robinson and Tyler Algier. I think it is crucial for them to put the ball into Kirk Cousins' court, because with their pass rush, Seattle's been as good with 4-man rushes as anybody in the league. They haven't had to blitz because their front line's been so good all year. Let Leonard Williams and Byron Murphy and DeMarcus Lawrence, what a year he's having. Let those guys feast up front, particularly in the interior where Atlanta's got some question marks with their interior offensive line, the new center as well. Take advantage of that and box in Kirk Cousins, who's never been super mobile, especially at this stage of his career. They got after him last year in that game in Atlanta. I think that's your recipe for big success here. Can you force Kirk Cousins into a few mistakes and get some sacks on him and really bottle up the run game to force Atlanta to have to play drop back ball? Yeah, I think if that happens, Seattle has a chance to make this one a laugher. Not that it's going to happen, but I think that would be the pathway where Seattle can make this one of those snowball games where things really snowball out of control for Atlanta.
Yes, and you talk about that. Seattle is currently favored by FanDuel by 7 points on the road. So that kind of tells you where FanDuel at least is thinking how lopsided this game potentially could wind up getting. And I think you're right. If that Seahawks interior pass rush can really get after this Falcons interior O-line, where you have Chris Lindstrom, their right guard, who's by far their best interior guy, he's been battling a foot injury all season long, and it's led to him not playing at the typical elite level that he has been characterized by over the last 5+ years here in Atlanta. And so that is not a recipe for success, given that the other 2 interior guys, in Ryan Newsel, the center, and Matthew Bergeron, their left guard, are fine, but I don't think they're much of a match for the Leonard Williams and the Byron Murphys of the world in that regard. So I think you have the right of it, where that interior pass rush could really do damage for a quarterback like Kirk Cousins, who is not going to do a lot to extend plays. But Corbin, is there any final thoughts here for this matchup, Week 14 matchup between the Falcons and Seahawks before we duck out of here?
Yeah, this is one of the games that I've had circled even before the start of the season. Like I said, I thought Atlanta was going to be a lot better than they have been. There's certainly been injuries that have factored into that, but this is still a game that I'm looking at thinking that it could potentially, I don't use the word trap game with Mike McDonald coach teams, because it feels like his team's ready to play. He hasn't had issues with letdowns, but it still kind of has that trap game feel a little bit, where if Atlanta can keep it close early, that this is a game that could absolutely boil down to the fourth quarter. Even with the Jets beating the Falcons last week, this has been a very up and down team. So I think Seattle covers, but I think it's going to be close. I just have a feeling that it's not going to be one of those games like we saw against New Orleans or Washington or Arizona, where they just absolutely ran the other team out of the building. I don't expect to see that. I think Atlanta is going to fight them at least. I think it's going to be a game that feels like it's a lot closer maybe than what some of the prognosticators are expecting it to be. So that'd be great for both teams in the sense you get a great game to watch on Sunday.
Hopefully, that's all I'm hoping for at this stage in the season, Corbin. It's just entertain me on Sunday. Don't make me feel like I wasted 3 hours on my Sundays. And we'll see if the Falcons and Seahawks entertain us this coming Sunday. Continue to make Locked On Falcons and Locked On Seahawks your first listen, so that you can get further updates for this Week 14 action. And, of course, for your second listen, check out Locked On NFL. We'll have you covered for all the other Week 14 action, 2 shows daily, giving you the scoop. It is all part of the Locked On Podcast Network, now the #1 sports podcast network in the galaxy, your team every day.